So a few minutes ago, I talked with Seth Berkley. He's the influential boss of Gavi, the organisation in charge of supplying vaccines to those poorer countries. And I asked him to give us a sense of that gap between the vaccines available in the developing world and what's needed, and also what he'd really like to see G7 leaders who are meeting in Cornwall promise to those poorer countries.
So thanks for the question. So we had planned now to have covered all healthcare workers worldwide and moved into the higher risk groups, because we all fundamentally believe that during a global pandemic, you're only safe if everyone is safe. In terms of numbers of doses, we're 190 million doses behind. Those were the doses that were being produced in India by the Serum Institute of India, the largest vaccine producer in the world. And as you know, given the severity of the local outbreak, they have kept those doses in country to provide vaccine doses in India, of course, an important effort of itself. So at the Cardiff Bay, we are hoping that G7 leaders will do a few things. One, stop the export bans, both of raw materials and vaccines. Second, donate surplus doses. We know that countries bought many different types of vaccines, not knowing which would work at the beginning. And so donating those excess ones right now during this shortfall so we can go ahead and begin to protect the rest of the world. And then over a longer term, make sure that we have the manufacturers continue to produce doses that are necessary to cover the world's need, whether it be for existing strains or some of the new variants that are going to be important. So those are some of the asks. And lastly, I think we really want to make sure ultimately that we have enough manufacturing capacity for the next pandemic, because it's evolutionarily certain that there will be a next pandemic.
I mean, Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, believes, he's on this programme, that it would be better if world leaders at the G7 simply agreed to donate money to buy vaccines rather than donating surplus vaccines. Is he right?
Well, the challenge with that over the medium to long term, he's absolutely right. And we just finished a fundraising effort where we've raised $9.6 billion to purchase COVID-19 vaccine doses for developing countries. The challenge right now is that there are no doses to buy. And the reason that's true is because many of the high income countries went ahead and bought a lot of doses, not knowing which ones were going to work. And so the challenge then is to release those doses now before, frankly, they end up going bad, and use those to protect others in the world so that we can stop these variants and stop the pandemic.
Now, you're on the record as saying that simply removing the patent protection on vaccines isn't going to solve anything very much in the short term, because, what part of the problem is lots of poorer countries simply don't have the know-how to make the vaccines, even if they've got the IP, as it were. How do we get around that? Because, you have just said that production capacity is a huge issue.
Absolutely. So first of all, it's not just poor countries, it's wealthy countries, it's other manufacturers. I mean, you've probably heard that there's a manufacturing plant in the US that ended up having a cross-contamination. And so many AstraZeneca doses and Johnson & Johnson doses are at risk because of that plant's inability to produce products. It is extremely complicated to do biologics. They are, after all, living organisms. It's not like making a chemical. So the most efficient way for producing more vaccine is to have one company not just say, yes, here's the IP. That's not the main problem. It's the 10,000 pages of know-how. It's the assays to show that this is really the same product so that you can use the same original clinical trials to prove it, et cetera. And when companies work together to do that, then they learn from each other. They pass the information back and forth and they increase the productivity, et cetera. So what we need is companies to lean in and to provide technology transfer. The limitations right now actually has been the people who have that experience, because of course we're scaling up vaccines at a faster rate than has ever been done in history. We use normally about 3.5 billion doses a year, with flu maybe 5 billion, and we're trying to get to 10 or 15 billion in one calendar year. So getting the knowledgeable people, the tech transfers, and the supplies is the critical bottlenecks right now.
And we're almost out of time, so if you could, perhaps in just 2 or 3 sentences, explain to some sceptical British people why we shouldn't just keep all our vaccines here.
So the critical issue in a global pandemic, and we saw this, was how quickly it spread, is that we have to make sure we damp down the pandemic everywhere. And a good example of this is all of a sudden a new variant appeared in India. That variant within a month was in 40 different countries. So we will continue to have waves of disease unless we go ahead and stop the disease spreading by vaccinating everywhere. It's not only the right thing to do, but it's also in every country's interest.
Seth Berkley, great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. Thank you for having me.